Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, January 3rd, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the top 10 films of 2018 according to the Slash Film writing staff. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Before we get to the top 10 lists from you guys, I wanted to first start off with, what did you guys think of this year of movies? Do you think this was exceptional, good, but not, great, or lower than usually what we get? Let's start with Chris.
I've heard several people tell me they thought this was a bad year for movies, and I'm generally surprised at that reaction because I think this was a very good year. I mean, this year had some incredibly diverse movies, and when I say diverse, I don't mean I mean like in the sense that they're.
You're not saying movies with diversity. You're saying diversity.
I'm saying they're so different. I mean, they're actually there were movies with diversity, but I'm saying there's such an eclectic amount of films this year, like that. I don't know. I'm like I said, I've heard several people say, "Oh, this is a weak year," and I really don't agree at all. I think this is a very strong year.
Ben, do you have any thoughts?
I strongly agree that this is a strong year. I loved this year in movies. There are so many and there are several movies that I haven't even seen yet that I'm really looking forward to check out. But I'm happy with my top 10 as it stands right now.
HJ, is this a strong year?
I'm in the same boat as both Ben and Chris. I don't really like to ascribe by the whole, is this a good year in movies, is this a bad year in movies, sort of discussions, because I think that everyone has their own kind of movies that appeal to them specifically. And because this year has been so diverse in the kind of genres and the type of stories that they tell, that this is a year that really can be great for anyone.
See, I don't want to take.
Peter's the only one.
I don't want to take any of your time because I'm going to have my time to talk on the editor's top 10. But I feel like I need to make this podcast interesting by providing an alternate take on this, right? Like I need to, I feel like I need to give you a sample of what I'm going to say on my top 10. Is that I do feel like this year had a lot of very good movies, but I just went on Letterboxd over the last week and I rated the last 10 years of movies, like my top 15 of the last 10-year movies, because I'm working on a project that's coming up, and not because I'm insane. And and I noticed on a lot of years I had many films that were 5-star movies, and for me to give a movie 5 stars, it means it's like a near perfect movie that like I'm going to be rewatching over and over again. And I feel like this year only had one, and I'm not going to spoil which one that is, even though everybody probably listening at this point knows what movie it is. But I feel like this year had a lot of 4-star movies, but not a lot of 5-star movies. And there are years that there's like 5-star movies in a year. It's like insane years in the last 10 years that like. So, I mean, does anybody feel that there's very good, but like nothing, like, are there movies this year that are going to be of your favorite of all time? Like if we give you like your top 50?
Will they stand the test of time or something?
Yeah. I'd say yes. There are several films this year that I know years from now, I'll still be thinking about them. I'll still want to revisit them. So I would say yes.
Okay.
Like Gotti.
Yeah, don't spoil the list coming up. For this year's top 10, since we're doing it all together, all three of you guys, we're going to be doing it in a format that I love. This podcast called The Dice Tower. It's a board game podcast. We're kind of stealing their format. So let's start off with number 10. Chris, what is your number 10?
My number 10 is the same as Ben's number 8, which means I can't say what the title is based on these wacky rules we're doing. So you'll have to wait.
Yeah, you'll have to wait. The tension is building. HC, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is Minding the Gap. It's a documentary by Bing Liu, and it tells a story of 3 skateboarders, including Bing Liu, in this Rust Belt town in Illinois. And Bing Liu kind of goes back to his hometown and it combines footage that he shot in modern day with footage he shot 12 years ago to tell this really delicate tale of kind of coming of age and adolescence in this forgotten Midwestern town, as well as the cycles of abuse and like economic angst that overshadow these young men's lives, including Lou himself. And it's a really wonderfully made slice of life film that becomes this kind of meditation on modern day masculinity.
My number 10 is A Quiet Place, John Krasinski's horror movie that came out early in 2018, but that's a film that stuck with me throughout the whole year. It has a really high concept premise, and I think he did a terrific job with this movie. I think he, as the co-writer, director, and star, I mean, he was a triple threat in this one. I thought his performance was really solid. Emily Blunt, who is his real-life wife, plays his wife in the movie, and she's incredible as always. And even Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe, the kid actors in the movie, were really good. And I normally cannot stand child actors. That's, I think, one of my biggest flaws as a movie watcher. So, yeah, all of this came together in a really, really great way for me. I enjoyed this movie, and especially the way that it played with sound and sort of weaponized one of the film medium's major elements, and I thought that was done exceptionally well.
Yeah, and both with HT's pick Minding the Gap and Ben's pick of A Quiet Place, there's no crossover later on the list. But when we come to our number 9, there's a lot of crossover. So Chris, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is Ben's number 6, and when you hear what it is, your head will literally fall off your body.
HT, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is Ben's number 8. See if you can spot it.
Nice.
These are almost as good as Jacob's jokes from the book. Ben, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is Chris's number 1. So I'm just going to pour some Pepto-Bismol into my drink over here, and we'll wait until we get around to that one.
Okay, let's get to number 8. HT, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is Burning. So Burning is a film by Lee Chang-dong, and it's a psychological drama that adapts Haruki Murakami's short story Barn Burning, and adapts it to a South Korean film about a young working class man who becomes obsessed with this former childhood neighbor of his who he doesn't remember at first. But after she leaves for Africa and returns in the arms of a suave, rich stranger played by a chilling Steven Yeun, his obsession with both of them grows until he's left in like this paranoid descent into madness, especially after Steven Yeun's character Ben reveals that he burns down greenhouses in his spare time. This is a haunting and really unnerving portrait of obsession, class hostility. It reminds me a lot of Vertigo. I would even go as far to call it Vertigo for the modern age, because it has that same sort of interplay of sex and paranoia and everything. And I quite like how it adapts this Haruki Murakami story to the big screen, which I feel like he is a very difficult author to bring to that kind of medium, because he has this, he's more of like a mood writer in a way, and he has this surreal magical realism that runs through all of his stories, and that is something that definitely comes into play in Burning, which is a movie that kind of chips away at your sense of reality until you're really unsure of what is true and what is false.
I'm just curious, has anybody else here seen Burning?
I have. I saw it at TIFF.
What did you think?
It's great. It's everything HT said is pretty much on the nose. It's fantastic. It's very long, and I've heard some people say they think it's too slow, but I honestly didn't feel that way at all. I was completely wrapped up in it.
Yeah, I feel like this is a film that's on a lot of the top 10 lists, but it's a film that I would assume 90% of our listeners have not seen, and it's one that I was hoping to get to before, I made my top 10 list. I still have a chance. There's still a chance. Chris, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is the same as HT's number 3, because she has very good taste. You could say she's my favorite with a U.
Thanks, Chris.
Ben, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is Blindspotting, which I love this movie. I saw it at Sundance last year. It's directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada, and it stars David Diggs and Rafael Casal as two guys in Oakland who are dealing with gentrification in the city, and David Diggs plays a guy who is almost done with his probation. He only has a couple more days left, but Casal, his best friend, is sort of this whirlwind temper. I mean, he's a guy who, he's like the prototypical example of a guy who always messes situations up, and he's that best friend that you just can't shake, but always gets you into trouble. And the movie tackles some pretty serious topics. There's like racial injustice and some trauma stuff going on in the film that makes it really serious, but it's also really, really, really funny. Like one of the funniest movies I saw in 2018, and I loved that balance in particular. I think the performances are both from the leads are both terrific, and I think more than any other movie I saw in 2018, this is the movie that sort of struck me as like the movie of the moment. So I love this one, Blindspotting.
You know, with 3 people on this podcast doing their top 10s, you'd think that there'd be a lot of crossover, and there is some crossover, but there's only one film that was on all 3 lists, and it's this one. So, Ichi, this was your number 9.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Blindspotting for all the reasons that Ben said. And I think for some people, it doesn't work for them because it is both incredibly grounded and incredibly stylized. A lot of the dialogue is rapped, for example. And at the end, there's this big climactic moment that ends with a rap soliloquy from David Diggs' character. And I know for that a lot of people, it takes them out of the movie, but I think it's just so powerful and so potent in a way that works so well within that film. So this is a movie that, really struck me and stayed with me for a long time after I saw it as well. So, it's great. I'm glad that we all included it, even though I feel like it also is one of the underseen movies of 2018.
And Chris, this is your number 10.
I don't have much more to add than what everyone said here, but this movie completely caught me off guard. Like, I don't know what I was expecting. I just watched it because I had heard people say it was good, and it pretty much like just blew me away just because it's so there's so much like energy in this movie that I was not expecting, and it's very good, and I'm a little disappointed that more people aren't talking about it. I just feel like it got lost in the shuffle somehow.
Yeah, I have like 2 or 3 films I got to see this weekend before I do my top 10 list next week, and this is one of them. And hearing it from all of you guys, I feel like there's no way it's not going to make my list, but we'll see. Let's move on to number 7. Let's start with Chris. What is your number 7?
I finally get to actually talk about a movie. My number 7 is Destroyer with Nicole Kidman. This is a film I've heard a lot of people not only say they disliked, but they thought it was like a bad movie, which I am shocked to hear. It's from Karen Kusama, who directed The Invitation and Jennifer's Body. And Nicole Kidman is this hard-drinking, washed-up cop. She's basically playing almost like the stereotypical has-been cop that's always been played by male actors in film. It's like this is the first time you see a female actor playing this sort of part, and that makes it unique. But the film itself is very the way it's laid out is really interesting to me, because it's really 2 films in one. One is this present day story where Nicole Kidman is washed up and she's trying to solve this murder. And the other is this past story where Nicole Kidman is younger, and she and Sebastian Stan, who's playing an FBI agent, have infiltrated this gang of bank robbers, and they're trying to get the goods on them. So, and eventually, the way the 2 stories collide is so cool and so clever. And I don't know, this is definitely up there for me. I recently rewatched it, a screener of it, and it was just as good as I remembered seeing it at TIFF. So again, I know there are a lot of people who don't like this, and I'm very surprised because I loved it.
My number 7 is Ben's number 2, and it's a movie that when you hear it, it will stick with you. That's a bad one.
My number 7 is Sorry to Bother You, which is another movie that I saw at Sundance. It's another movie that takes place in Oakland, and it is terrific. I mean, this might be, for me, I think the most exciting movie of 2018, just because it is so unexpected what happens in this film. Lakeith Stanfield plays a telemarketer who discovers that he has the power to use a white voice and completely transform the way that he sounds. And it's like, I know HT is a big fan of magical realism. I feel like this movie has a lot of that. And it is, I mean, it has terrific actors. I mean, Tessa Thompson is in this. Terry Crews is in this. Patton Oswalt is doing a voice. I mean, the list goes on. The cast in this movie is insane. And it's Bruce Riley's directorial debut. He's a musician, activist, filmmaker who just really came out of the gate firing on all cylinders with this movie. It's a little shaggy at times, but I feel like it has so much to say just about society and culture and appropriation and all sorts of huge ideas that the passion sort of outweighs any I guess structural flaws or any of that shagginess that other people might have seen in this movie. I really like this one a lot.
I don't think I've ever heard the word shaggy to be used to describe a film, but I completely agree. And why, HD? Why do you not love the magical realism of Sorry to Bother You?
I didn't say that.
No, I said she likes magical realism in general, and this movie has a lot of that.
I know. I did like the magical realism of Sorry to Bother You a lot. I enjoyed the film, but I feel like it was just a little too weird for me to put on like my top list, even though I usually enjoy those kind of just gonzo films. For me, there's just something that didn't completely cohere, though I did like watching it through like the process of watching it, just because it's so gonzo, like I said.
Yeah, Sorry to Bother You only appears on Ben's list, and Destroyer only appears on Chris's list. Let's move on to number 6. Let's start with Chris. What is your number 6?
My number 6 is Mandy, which is the Nicolas Cage movie that a lot of people were talking about this year. This movie is almost impossible to really describe because on the surface it has this very simple revenge storyline where Nicolas Cage is wronged in some way and he goes after this crazy cult that wronged him. But what makes the movie so special is just how unique it looks. Like, this movie looks unlike any other film you're going to see this year. It's like this like crazy acid trip. It's like if you've ever seen like the side of a van that has like a dragon painted on it that's driven by like some loser nerd. It's like that. It's like that, but it's come to life and it's also on fire and also it's covered with blood. So that's what this movie looks like. It's like the side of a van come to life, if that makes any sense. And it just it stunned me watching it. Like I don't even. I feel like I don't have the words to adequately describe how incredible this movie just is and feels. It has this really dark, occultish vibe that very few films are able to nail down. So, I loved it.
Now, this film was only on your list. It wasn't on HT or Ben's. Have either of you seen this?
I have. I will say it's on my top 25, so it's not on my top 10, but it is there just because it is just so strange and surreal and twisty that you can't help but love it because it just goes, it's gunning for it. It goes for the walls or whatever the term is.
Yeah, this is the first movie that I've ever been quoted on the Blu-ray box for, and I think that it speaks to the quality of the movies of 2018 that I'm quoted on the Blu-ray for this movie and it's not even in my top 10. So it just shows that I loved all these other movies a little bit more than that. But yeah, Mandy is a tremendous film, and I think Chris's description about the side of a van comes to life is just about as accurate as you can get. I think the big reason I didn't put it on my list was because I felt like the first half was just so deliberately paced in I don't know, it took a long time for that movie to really get going for me, but once it did, it turns into this really, really like jaw-dropping experience that's really unlike anything else you'll ever see.
I just don't understand why it has to be a nerd driving the van, Chris.
I say nerd in a loving way. It's a compliment. You're a
total loser.
A total loser nerd is a compliment in my mind.
Okay, let's move on to HT. What is your number 6?
My number 6 is Eighth Grade. This is the film that is directed by Bo Burnham in his directorial debut, and it's just this wonderful portrait of adolescent angst. And it's basically a horror movie. It's one of the hardest movies I watched this year because it's just so horrifyingly real and authentic. It's a movie that it chronicles the trials of 13-year-old Kayla, played by Elsie Fisher, who is an awkward eighth grader going through the final week of eighth grade, and she's struggling with anxiety and the pressures of social media. And it's this really profound coming of age film that I feel like hasn't been talked about enough this year either. It reminds me a lot of the authenticity that Lady Bird, for example, brought last year, and yet no one really is talking about it in the same vein, despite it feeling even more raw and vulnerable to me, I feel. And that's largely in part because of Elsie Fisher's just a stunning performance. She's so vulnerable and great in this role. And I think it's a really profound, universal coming-of-age story.
Yeah, I feel like people need to see this film. I'm surprised that no one else on this podcast had this film in their top 10. And
Chris hasn't seen it, I know, because he doesn't want to relive that experience.
Yeah, I have avoided seeing it.
I saw it and liked it. I just didn't like it enough for it to jump that high up.
The anxiety I felt sitting in that seat watching that movie. And you say it's basically a horror movie. It isn't a horror movie, but like I guess it is. It's horrific in ways. Mm-hmm. It's it really has you squirming in your seat, and I don't know. I feel like we're probably selling it too harshly in those terms. It is a coming of age, film. So let's move on to number 6 for Ben.
My number 6 is an actual horror film, Hereditary. This movie is deeply unsettling and really crisply crafted and super scary. I am not a huge horror movie guy, but I love this movie. Toni Collette delivers like a career best, unbelievably good performance. I am shocked that people are not talking about her in the same way that they're talking about Olivia Colman and some of the other actors or actresses in terms of like end of the year awards consideration, because I honestly feel like she gave maybe the performance of the year in 2018. She was incredible as this mother who her family begins to fall apart after the death of her own mother, and things get supernatural and weird from there. And there are really, really incredible, unforgettable moments in this movie, and just the tension and the way that Ari Aster, the first-time director, was able to craft and really just sort of like turn that wrench, and crank it as the movie went on to a climax that is. It reminded me a little bit of Kill List, which is a 2011 movie that probably not a lot of listeners have seen, but it's another movie that really, I guess, brought out that same sense of dread that Hereditary did for me. So I would recommend both of those, but yes, Hereditary is my number 6.
And Chris had this on his list at number 9. Chris, you also liked Hereditary.
Yeah, I loved it. I agree with pretty much everything Ben said, and I also want to second the fact that I can't believe Toni Collette isn't like the front runner for a Best Actress nomination. Like, I don't know if A24 just isn't campaigning her for some reason or what, but because it's a horror movie, the Academy doesn't care. I really don't know, but she really should be at like the top of the list because her performance in this is incredible.
Yeah, I think it's probably for both of the reasons you listed there. Let's move on to our number 5. Chris, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is Ben's number 1. Something about a bear. All right, move on.
Ben, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is Mission Impossible Fallout, which in my mind is the ideal version of blockbuster summer tentpole entertainment. It is just a tremendous action movie, a ton of fun, and sort of a miracle of a movie. It's the 6th installment in a franchise that somehow is just as good, if not better, than a lot of the entries that came before it, which is like really, really rare in franchise filmmaking. And Chris McQuarrie, man, that guy is just a straight up genius. Like, if you listen to how this movie was put together and how he created this film, it seems to go against every good idea that you've ever heard that filmmakers, like every approach that he took seems like the wrong way to do it, but somehow he managed to not only make this movie, which is just like a miracle in and of itself, but make it a terrific, super fun, tent pole or set piece filled, like jaw dropper of an action movie. And I loved every minute of it.
And this is only on your list at number 5. I'm kind of shocked. Like, I feel like this film should be on every top 10 list this year. Chris, you were quoted in all the advertising for this movie, and it didn't make your top 10. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. It's in like my top 30 of the year, but I think it's pretty much the same reason Ben said for Mandy, where I had so many films I loved this year that it just couldn't quite crack that top 10. But it is one of my favorite movies of the year, and it's incredibly entertaining. So I love it. It just couldn't quite get in there because I think I like all these other movies more.
Did you say it didn't make your top 30 or was in your top 30?
It was in my top 30.
Okay.
It's also in my top 20, so don't worry. We still love this movie, Peter.
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of critics, when they're making these top 10 lists, and I think it's less of a problem with the slash film lists here, so I'm not criticizing you guys, but and it's also a problem, obviously, with the Academy and stuff, is they tend to reward films that are, of more substance than, blockbusters, even when
there's
they're blockbusters.
Genre snobbery going on.
Yeah. And obviously, looking at your guys' list, this is not happening here. But HT, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is Chris's number 2. Don't roam far.
Okay. Number 4. Ben, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is Searching, which is a movie that I think I may have talked about more than anyone outside of the actual filmmaking team behind that movie.
I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about it, Ben.
I think that might actually be a fact. At this point.
Might be. I don't know. I'm guessing if you've listened to this podcast, if you've listened this far, you know that I love this movie. This film stars John Cho. It takes place entirely across computer screens. At this point, I can just say blah, 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 and you can fill in the reasons that I love it because everybody listening knows why.
But give us the pitch, because there's probably, I would guarantee, just like... what movie I said earlier, but I said Burning. I'm betting 95% of our audience has not even watched Searching. Like, why should they watch it?
Okay, so I have not seen the Unfriended movies, which I know also take place on computer screens, but from what I understand, Searching is different and better in that the camera actually moves around. It's not just a locked off screen where you're looking at a Skype window for the whole movie. And I feel like that might be something that could potentially turn people off if they think that that's what this movie is. This film is way more innovative than that. It has a lot going on. The intro of this movie, I think it contains one of the best movie moments of this year, which is the sort of it reminds me a lot of Pixar's Up. There is a very self-contained I don't know, like a prologue to the movie almost that is super emotional, and it contains like very little actual dialogue. It all takes place again across computer screens, and it's it's memorable, as a piece unto itself. But as for the movie at large, John Cho is a leading man, and he proved it in this movie. He is really great as this father who is on a desperate search to find his missing teenage daughter, and he looks through all of her tech to try to track her down and figure out where she is and whether she's been caught up in this mystery and a scandal and all sorts of crazy stuff. The script for this movie is really, really excellent. It's a detective story, but just told in a modern construct, a modern way, and I think it's one of the best written movies of the year and one of the best executed movies of 2018, just because there were so many ways that this could have gone wrong, but Anish Chaganty, who's the writer-director, really made it look easy. So I love this film.
Did either of you see Searching? I'm assuming both of you saw this film, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw it.
Why was it not in your top 10?
I really liked it. I think it has some problems. Like, I think Deborah Messing's performance is really bad, and that I think kind of ruined. Like, she, John Cho, he nails it. He seems very believable. Deborah Messing always seems like she's like performing here, and I mean, part of that actually works with her character, which I guess is sort of a spoiler. Sorry, but her performance is just too clunky for me to give it. To have it be on my favorite of the year list, but I did really like it.
Yeah, I think it was in my top 20, but I agree also about Deborah Messing. I found her kind of wooden. It didn't detract too much from the movie for me, but it made it not a perfect movie.
Interesting. Chris, what is your number 4?
My number 4.
Chris, why are your choices on your top 10 higher on someone else's list?
I don't know. My number 4 is Ben's number 3.
We could meet him on Beale Street to talk about it later.
Yes. Good. What Peter said.
HT, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is Paddington 2. So Paddington 2 was a balm for my soul in the hellscape that was 2018. I believe it's a near perfect movie. It's just a beautifully visually stunning film that also has this sort of funky Buster Keaton-esque type of slapstick and physical comedy, while having just like these great supporting characters who played by actors who are just giving it their all, especially Hugh Grant, who turns in, I think, one of the most exciting performances of his career as a washed-up actor who frames the titular Paddington for theft. This is just a complete delight to watch. I haven't had as much fun in a theater as in a long time as I was watching Paddington 2. And it's just, I think, the distillation of pure joy in a movie. So I think, and it transcends whatever people think of, or like however people brush off family films. It's zippy, it's fun, it's quirky in the best way, and I completely love it. It has gone down since the halfway point. It used to be my number 2, but it's still up there, and it's still one of my favorite movies of the year. Yeah,
we did halfway point lists on the podcast and on the site, which I'll link in the show notes that people can go back to if they want to catch some of the ones that fell off and see how that went. This is a movie that is strange to me because I feel like every critic loved this movie. It got the praise that, like, I feel like Pixar in its height got, and yet I don't feel like it's getting the love on the top 10 list at the end of the year. Like, why do you think that is?
I don't know. It did come out really early in the year, and technically in Britain, in the UK, it was a 2017 release. So that might be why it kind of fell off, just because it was so early and people have forgotten about it, which they shouldn't. But I wonder if it is because it's a family film and people tend to undervalue those compared to the big prestige pieces that come out later in the year.
Let's move on to our number 3. Let's now meet Ben, who is live from Beale Street.
Yes. My number 3 is Roma. No, it's If Beale Street Could Talk, obviously. This is Barry Jenkins' new movie. This film is really, really tremendous. It is Barry Jenkins is one of those guys that is able to depict sensuality on screen arguably better than any other American filmmaker. He is somebody who is not afraid to put his camera really up close to in front, right there with his actors. And it sort of engenders this extra level of empathy and connection to his characters that really, really works especially well in this film. Stephen James and Kiki Lane are the lead actors in this film. It's a period piece where the two of them are living in New York and trying to basically just make it in the 1970s. And something happens. I'm not going to give away what it is, I guess, for people who haven't had a chance to see it yet. But this film it's really, really tremendous. I think personally that it has the best score of the year. Nicholas Bertel's score is just, it is emotional and devastating and haunting and triumphant all at the same time. And man, I really love this movie. And Chris, I know that it's very close on this list to your number. It was number 3 for me, number 4 for you. So you obviously have a very fond spot for it in your heart as well.
Yeah, pretty much everything you said, I agree with. This movie is so emotional, and just the way, those glances where Barry Jenkins as the characters look directly into the camera. That's something, he's picking up from Jonathan Demme. Jonathan Demme used to do that in all of his movies, but it's so startling when you see it. Even if you've seen it in movies before, it catches you completely off guard because it's so intimate and it's so unexpected. And like you said, the soundtrack for this movie is just wonderful. It's just it makes me swoon. It's so lovely.
Mm-hmm. And I also just want to give a quick shout out to Regina King and Brian Tyree Henry, who both play kind of small supporting roles in this. Brian Tyree Henry a little bit smaller than Regina King, but both are just like, those are knockout performances for actors who aren't leads in a movie.
Okay, let's move on to Chris's number 3.
Yes. Oh my God.
I'm not sure what I love more about this, like your disdain for how we're doing this, or I don't know.
My number 3 is not really here because it's HT's number 2.
Nice.
That was a good one.
Thank you.
HT, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is The Favorite. So this is the new film by Yorgos Lanthimos, and it's this pitch black and nasty and really catty period drama that chronicles the late years of Queen Anne's sort of anarchic reign as she hosts duck races and builds palaces as war rages with France. So this tells a story of her sort of twisted love triangle with her close friend Lady Sarah, played by Rachel Weisz, and a newly arrived servant Abigail, played by Emma Stone. Oh, I forgot to say that Queen Anne is played by Olivia Colman, who is also excellent. But this is just a 3-tiered performance from all of them. They have this great, vicious, and delirious dance of schemes between all 3 of them as Abigail and Sarah vie for the Queen's favor. And it's a period film that sort of straddles the line between historical melodrama and satire, and it feels like a historical period piece that is put through a funhouse mirror in both the way that the visuals are distorted. There's a lot of fisheye lens, and the values are distorted as well. No one here thinks or talks normally. They all speak in some sort of backhanded or passive-aggressive way, especially Rachel Weisz's character, Lady Sarah, who basically bullies Queen Anne while she kind of like negs her in a way. She bullies her, but then makes love to her. There's a lot of powerful lesbian energy in this film. It's so good and so catty, and I absolutely loved it. It's funny too. I forgot to say, it's hilarious.
And Chris, this movie, The Favorite, was your number 8 of the year.
Yeah, I've said this before, but I'm not usually a fan of Lanthimos's movies because I just find them really, really mean, like needlessly mean, like where to the point where the message just literally seems to be, life is terrible. And I already know that. I don't need a movie to tell me. But this movie, even though it's mean too, the meanness is done in this different way. It's almost like a Coen Brothers movie in the sense that their movies are frequently cruel too, but they somehow make the cruelness funny. And this movie does that too. This movie had me pretty much like in hysterics when I watched. I was just laughing from beginning to end. There's like a dance sequence in this movie that I almost like fell off my couch laughing at. It's so friggin' funny.
And let's move on to our number 2 movies of the year.
My number 2 is Roma from Alfonso Cuarón. I saw this at TIFF as well, and when this movie started, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. So, I was one of the people who got to see it on a big screen, which is a plus, and it looked gorgeous. It shot, almost the entire movie is shot in a wide shot, which is so unusual because you see so much of the frame, and like every inch of the frame is being used in the film, which a lot of filmmakers don't do in this day and age. They seem to rely more on medium shots and close-ups, and this whole film doesn't do that. So as I was watching it, I was like, wow, this looks gorgeous, but it's kind of slow, because the first like half hour, 45 minutes, not a lot really happens. It just sets up these characters. It focuses on a maid and the family she works for. And, I kept thinking like, like if this doesn't get better, I'm going to be a little bored. And then it very slowly starts to change into something else. And then there's this really shocking event that, because the whole movie up until this point is sort of quiet and toned down, it feels extra shocking. And at that point I was like, oh my God, this movie is not what I was expecting, and it's pretty amazing. And from then on out, I was just hooked. And by the end of this movie, I and everyone else in the theater was just like sobbing uncontrollably. Like all you could hear when the credits were rolling was just this wall-to-wall sound of like people just crying, and it was an incredible transcendent experience for me. So I love this. And I know some people say like you have to see this in the theater, but honestly, if you watch this on a TV, you'll be fine too. Just see this movie. It's on Netflix right now.
And you can watch it in 4K if you have a 4K TV. HT, this was your number 5.
Yeah, I agree with everything Chris said. This is a beautiful, sprawling, and yet really intimate movie that does take a little bit of time to get started, but then towards the end, it just kind of hits you with this wave of emotion in a way that like you won't recover from. So it's a really beautiful film, and it feels very personal too, because Alfonso Cuarón did base it off of his own childhood growing up in 1970s Mexico, and it has that kind of timeless feel to it.
Ben, why was Roma not on your list?
I don't know. I don't have a good defense for why this movie didn't make it. I think maybe because I watched it at home. Maybe if I would have watched it in the theater, it might have had I thought pretty much like as Chris and HT were talking, I was like, yes, I agree with all of these points, but for some reason it wasn't on my list. So I don't know. I guess it just it didn't connect with me as profoundly as it did for them, and it's very good. It's yeah, I agree with everything, and I certainly can't blame anybody for having this movie very high up on their list, because it's an incredible achievement both on a technical level and on a personal level. As they both mentioned, it really just sort of hits you, especially in that home stretch. But yeah, it just didn't make it for me.
Let's talk about your number 2 movie of the year.
My number 2 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I think is the biggest film-related surprise of last year for me. I was really looking forward to seeing what this filmmaking team could do, but I could never have anticipated this movie being that good. I think it is the best Spider-Man movie ever made, and maybe even the best superhero movie ever made, which is a huge claim considering there have been 6 billion superhero movies over the past 25 years. But I think, obviously it looks incredible, but just the look of it, if there was nothing to back that up, it would just be sort of an empty style exercise. But I think the script is so good. It is hilarious. It's creative. It's inspiring. It is joyous. It's really like it gives you everything, or gives me everything that I want in sort of a piece of pop art entertainment. It has characters that I genuinely care about. It has incredible action sequences. It is about a lot of things like identity and sort of specifically the types of myth-making stories that we tell, and how those stories are no longer just about white guys, which is kind of incredible. I think this movie is easily one of the best films of the year, and a huge surprise for me.
And Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was HT's number 7.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. It's just a stunning feat of animation, and also a really heartwarming story that gets to the core of what a Spider-Man movie and any superhero movie should be about, which is just the characters. And it never feels crowded either, which is something that was really astonishing to me. It was always about Miles Morales' story. And I love Miles a lot. I wanted to, I think Peter was talking about this earlier, I wanted to spend more time with him and see more of his world. So it was just a film that I want to keep revisiting, and I have not yet gone back to it, but it's something that I will see over and over again, I'm sure.
You should check out the comic books, HT. It's really great. Not the. I mean, I think the movie is better, like the movie plus the comics in a big way. But it's really fun spending more time with him, and the other characters in that world. HT, what is your number 2 of the year?
My number 2 is You Were Never Really Here. So this is Lynn Ramsey's brutal tone poem, which is this harrowing film about Joaquin Phoenix's hired gun, Joe, who makes a living from rescuing young girls from child prostitution rings, until one day he has a case that exposes this widespread corruption and results in him losing his latest rescue and basically like forced to go on the run. And he becomes intent on rescuing the girl Nina that he had lost because of this big corruption. And it becomes sort of similar to other like revenge lone wolf stories like Taxi Driver in the other sense. But there's really no sense of catharsis here because this is a movie that is tremendously lean and completely absent of the thrills that you expect from these kind of movies. It doesn't offer you that catharsis that you usually would get in revenge films. And it kind of it feels like a breakdown really of that lone wolf mythos and a subversion of it in a brilliant way. And I really love this film, and I especially love Joaquin Phoenix's performance in this. He transforms into this hulking, dense mass of a man who really can't function in modern day society. Like the only way he knows how to function is through violence, and that's something that I found really intriguing and really compelling to watch.
And your number 2 film of the year was Chris's number 3. Chris, why did you love You Were Never Really Here?
Pretty much all the reasons HT said. It's just, it's not what I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be this like violent, Taxi Driver-esque film because that's kind of how it was marketed, and that's really not what it is. And just the editing of this film is so unique. And what I love most about this film is that it doesn't really tell you anything. Like the audience, the viewer, has to put the pieces together. And I appreciate that Lynn Ramsey trusts the audience enough to be smart enough to figure out what's going on without just flat out showing them. And I know that might not appeal to other people, but I really love that aspect of it.
Ben, you did not have this on your list. Is there a reason why?
Nope. No, I enjoyed this movie, and again, I agree with everything that they just said. It just didn't connect with me in that same way.
No, I also agree with what they said. I think since I probably won't be talking about this on my list, I love the style. I love the execution. I do love everything Chris is saying about this movie. I just feel like it's a shallow pool after that. I don't feel like there's much depth, but okay. I know it's 2 of your favorite
Peter.
movies of the year, so I'm not gonna rain on your parade. Let's move on to our number 1 films of the year. Let's start with Chris. What is your number 1 film of 2018?
My number 1 is First Reformed, the Paul Schrader film about a crisis of faith. It's has Ethan Hawke in it, playing a reverend. Ethan Hawke, I think, gives the best performance of his career in this movie. He's so good. I mean, the whole movie is in his head, through narration and through his point of view. So we spend almost there. I don't think there's a single scene, except for maybe near the end, that he's not in. And it's remarkable how much he carries this film. And it's a very bleak and depressing film, but it swept me up in its story of this, this reverend who tries to counsel this guy who's very upset about, climate change and, the way, that the world is pretty much going to hell. And by talking to this guy, it's almost like this guy's outlook on the world is like a disease that Ethan Hawke catches. And he starts feeling the same way this guy did. And he starts having this sort of breakdown where he's acknowledging that human beings have destroyed God's creation, being, the world. And that's a terrible thought to have. The whole movie is just about him dealing with that crisis of faith and how he's going to react to it. And it culminates in this final scene that is so incredible. It's probably my favorite scene of the year, and I won't give it away because if you haven't seen it yet, the less you know about the final scene, the more amazing it is when you see it.
This one was my number 9, and I love this movie, just like Chris. I mean, I think that conversation that Ethan Hawke's character has with the environmentalist about climate change and whether or not it's responsible to bring a child into the world was just so effective and affecting. I mean, I feel like that's a conversation that a lot of people actually had last year amid all of the chaos and insanity of what was going on in the world last year. Man, this movie, I mean, it really sort of crystallized all of those, like the nation's collective thoughts. I thought it was sort of like, just like Blindspotting, I thought it was it was a strong contender for a movie of the moment because of the way that it sort of tapped into these like dormant thoughts that were just below the surface for a lot of people.
Okay, let's move on to HT's number 1 film of 2018. What is it?
My number 1 film is Shoplifters, directed by Koreeda Hirokazu. I'm sorry. So this is a film that deservedly won the Palme d'Or at Cannes last year. And it follows this sort of pseudo-family unit who lives together in this crowded house owned by this aging elderly woman who basically pays for them through her late husband's pension. And they're a motley crew that kind of make living off of this pension as well as menial labor and subsidize the rest by shoplifting, which becomes this sort of fun ritual between the father figure Osamu and this young boy Shota. And they one day on the way back from a particularly good shoplifting haul run into a young girl who was left outside in the cold on her parents' patio. And concerned for her safety, they take her home and basically like fold her into their strange family unit. It's this really tender, really beautifully, deeply felt portrait of life and the many textures of life. And while it's about this family that lives on the margins in sort of abject poverty, it's delivered with this really poignant emotional weight that at first you don't quite notice, but then it gradually overwhelms you at the end. So much so that you start crying multiple times. And it has also, like Roma, a beach scene in which this moment of emotional catharsis is reached on the beach, and you kind of just feel this overwhelming empathy and emotion and humanity seeping through the screen. And this is just a movie that touched me so much, and was a movie I saw it right before I turned in my top 10 list, and it shot to the top of my list, and is something that I absolutely adored and loved.
Ben and Chris, is this a film that you have seen?
I have not. I've been meaning. This is one of my blind spots of the year. I want to see it. I just have not had the opportunity.
Same.
Yeah, I feel like this is a film that is hitting a lot of critics' top 10s that I think the vast majority of this world, including critics, have not seen. I think this and Burning, I think there's some crossover there that just American audiences just haven't had a chance to see it. Ben, let's move on to your top 10 or top 1 movie of 2018. What is it?
My number 1 is Annihilation, which is Alex Garland's adaptation of Jeff Vandermeer's book. And I think no other movie really affected me in the same way that Annihilation did last year. It is more of like an experiential thing than like a traditional narrative. I think Garland is way more interested in how this movie makes you feel. I also saw 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time last year, and I talked about that on the podcast. And this movie sort of reminds me of that in that it's sort of going for this really like primal metaphysical connection with an audience instead of necessarily just a traditional linear story or anything. And the narrative is interesting. It's about a group of women who head into what is called the Shimmer, which is this mysterious alien bubble that is slowly like building out and threatening to eat the entire world. But the all of the little moments, the disturbing little things about the bear that screams with a human voice, and these really quietly beautiful moments in there, and this really, really incredible climax that takes place in this lighthouse. All of this sort of just combines to be the type of like super confident and really bold filmmaking that we do not see in modern studio movies. And this was released by Paramount in the US, and then the studio ended up just like I think brushing it off to Netflix internationally, so a lot of people still haven't had the chance to see this one. But man, it is a powerful moving experience. And I know this is also on Chris's list, and I think Chris wrote like what I consider to be like the definitive piece on Annihilation, his read about how the movie is about depression. But Chris, I want to hear you talk about this one too.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I wrote a very, very long, I think it was like 1,000,000 words. I don't know. I don't remember the count. It was very long. And yeah, this is a movie a lot of people either didn't see or didn't, I don't want to say didn't understand, just that they didn't really connect with it, because it's a very challenging movie. It's not your typical modern sci-fi film, which, a lot of modern sci-fi, it tries to be escapist, it tries to be fun, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is very dark, challenging, serious sci-fi that's asking questions that it doesn't actually have answers for. And I know that drives some people crazy. People don't like ambiguity, but I personally, if it's done right, I love that in a film. I love coming away with questions, because it makes me want to, talk about the movie more. It makes me want to think about the movie more. And this film does that so well. And I do wish more people had seen it, but I feel like this is going to be one of those films like 5-10 years from now. People are going to look back and be like, oh, that is like a stone cold masterpiece, and everyone was wrong. Like, I do feel like that's going to happen with this film eventually.
And it's funny you saying that, because this is not your top one film of the year. This is your number 5, and you thought this is going to be considered a masterpiece in 5 years.
Yeah, like I said, it was a good year. All these movies I loved so much. Like, if I could do ties, I would probably have some ties on this list where like 2 films were at number 2 and so on like that. But that would be silly, so I didn't do that.
We should talk about now. I was going to do this before, but it's better to do it after the fact, of what movies you guys haven't seen this year, caveats to your list. Let's start with HT. What films have you yet to see? So, like, just so people don't send us angry emails being like, why didn't HT like this movie?
I already have a comment, I think, of someone saying I should include If Beale Street Could Talk. And I wish I could, too, because I have not yet seen it. I'm still very upset that I wasn't able to watch it in time before I finalize my list. Because I feel like it's a movie that I would absolutely connect with and adore. So that's one that I haven't been able to see and that I was sad to miss. Another one is Chloe Zhao's The Writer, which is on Amazon for rent, which I know, like, I have no excuse. I just didn't find the time to watch it, and that's one I've heard a lot of good praise for, and which I feel like I would enjoy as well. So I think those are my top ones. I think, yeah, there's a few I haven't seen. I haven't seen Black Klansman. I haven't seen Widows. I haven't seen Can You Ever Forgive Me, which I've heard surprisingly good things about as well. And I haven't either seen this Polish film, Cold War, which I've also heard good things about as well. So those are ones that I wish I could have seen before, but I didn't get the chance to, and I'm sorry.
Ben, what is your list of shame?
My list of shame includes Burning and Shoplifters, which I know are on this list. The Rider, like she just mentioned, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Anne and the Apocalypse, I didn't have a chance to see that one. And The Sisters Brothers, which I feel like I know Chris talked about earlier in the year, and I feel like I would really, really like that movie. I just did not have a chance to see it. Also, Leave No Trace and Support the Girls. I didn't get around to those, but I just saw that this morning that Leave No Trace is now available on Amazon and Support the Girls is on Hulu. So I've already turned in my list. It's locked. It's done. But I'm going to have to take the time and carve that out to check out those movies anyway. So for anybody out there who's maybe looking to round out their own lists, those 2 are available on streaming right now.
Chris, do you know how many movies you have seen this year?
Oh, not off the top of my head. A lot, many movies.
Was it like 200, 300?
I think it was close to 300, maybe even a little over 300.
So even a person who has seen 300 movies in a year, you have a list of shame.
Yeah. The films I wish I'd be able to catch have already been mentioned. One was Shoplifters, which we talked about, and the other was Cold War, which HT mentioned, which I hear is really good. And I actually have a screener of it, and I just have not had the chance to get around to watching it. Maybe this weekend I will, even though my list is already in. But those are really the two big ones I wish I had seen. Other than that, I don't have too many regrets. Like, there are other films this year I haven't seen that I'll eventually catch up on, but they're not like I'm not like, oh, I wish I had seen that in time.
Yeah. Do you guys want to do honorable mentions? Like, I feel like doing a top 10 is so hard because you leave so much on, I guess the cutting room floor. HT, what are like some of like, just quickly films that like from, 11 to 15 or something like that didn't just missed your list by that much?
So my 11 through 15 is Leave No Trace, which is a really quiet drama that I absolutely loved. Mirai, the anime by Mamoru Hosoda. Happy as Lazaro, which, again, the magical realism theme. And then First Reformed. And lastly, Black Panther.
Black Panther is also on my honorable mentions. Paddington 2 is there. Destroyer is there. And then two movies that we haven't talked about yet today. Free Solo, which is a documentary about rock climbing the El Capitan wall in Yosemite National Park without any ropes. That movie is insane. That movie is, I think, in theaters still. And then Lizzie, which is one that I saw at Sundance and really, really liked. That stars Chloe Sevigny and Kristen Stewart about the Lizzie Borden murders. And I'm not sure if that one's available streaming or on Blu-ray or DVD or anything like that. But yeah, those are the 11 through 15 for me.
My number 11 is Burning, which we've talked about. My number 12 is Widows, which is another one of those movies that a lot of people don't like, and I think they're crazy because I love it. Number 13 is Can You Ever Forgive Me, which is a really good movie that proves Melissa McCarthy should stop working with her husband and work with other people because she's great in other people's movies. Number 9 is Hereditary, and number 14 is Vice, and number 15 is Suspiria, the Suspiria remake. And Vice, obviously, is another one of those films that a lot of people hated this year. Some people have even called it the worst movie of the year, but it worked for me. I acknowledge that it's very unsubtle, but I feel like that sort of works with this what the film is trying to be.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com, and you can find some of the articles we mentioned linked in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to peter@slashfilm.com. And please go over to our iTunes page, give us a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.